Hi. The topic that I chose to research was regarding the implementation of restorative justice practices in schools. Restorative justice is a method of accountability where a perpetrator is responsible for restoring a sense of safety when harm is done to a person or a community. This is kind of in direct opposition to the punitive systems of justice that are utilized by the United States, where the aim is mostly just to punish the offender. Research has shown that restorative justice practices are extremely effective with higher satisfaction on both the victim and the perpetrator end. Perpetrators have a higher sense of accountability and empathy, and victims report feeling more closure and acceptance when compared to the punitive justice system. It's also shown to reduce recidivism and create safer and more connected communities. Restorative justice is mostly used in the criminal justice system, but because it's been a major success, it has made it very appealing for the realm of education, specifically regarding the school-to-prison pipeline. This is a phenomenon where students who have had contact with punitive discipline in school are more likely to have future contact with the criminal justice system. Punitive methods of discipline include suspension and expulsion, both of which have shown to increase the risk of incarceration as an adult. This is because under-resourced schools usually have to rely on police presence for discipline, thereby criminalizing a lot of these minor behavioral infractions. This causes an enmeshment between students and the criminal justice system that's more likely to be repeated in adulthood. This phenomenon also disproportionately affects students of color, with Black students being 3 times more likely to be suspended than their white peers. So in order to combat this, some schools are now trying to utilize restorative justice practices. There are a lot of ways to implement that in schools, but all of them focus on fostering open communication and empathy towards others. In most cases, this entails that when a student violates community guidelines, they meet with a facilitator and whoever was impacted by that violation, and they all come up with a solution to repair the harm done together. This encourages more self-reflection and accountability for the students, while also creating a larger sense of community within the school. So my theory with all of this was that schools that utilize restorative justice practices will have a lower rate of behavioral incidents, therefore protecting students from unnecessary involvement with punitive systems, which would then hopefully carry on into adulthood. So for the project, I decided to use a hypothetical high school that utilizes restorative justice practices. This high school would be as representative as possible of the average American high school, mostly speaking demographically. I then counted the number of serious behavioral incidents for the high school's 10th graders the year before the restorative justice practices were implemented. I then compared those numbers to the number of serious behavioral incidences for 10th graders 3 years after implementing the restorative justice practices. I decided to do that 3-year gap because research has shown that it does take a few years for teachers and students to adjust to the new model. So with that data, I then performed a 2-tailed independent samples t-test with a 0.05 level of significance. The results did show that there is a statistically significant difference between the 2 years of 10th graders, with a large drop in behavioral incidents. So given these results, I would hope that more schools decide to implement restorative justice practices. And then on a more macro level, I hope that the federal and state governments will see the positive results from this and so many other studies, and maybe work towards encouraging schools nationwide to move away from punitive discipline. There were several limitations within this research, however, both with the restorative justice practice and with the study itself. Restorative justice is only as good as its implementers, so training of staff and the disabling of punitive systems is necessary for the practice to be effective. As for this study in particular, there are actually a lot of confounding variables that could be impacting the data. While I was hoping to be representative in terms of demographics, I could not really account for things like, the income level of the area, geographic context, access to resources, that kind of thing. So all of those variables could impact the amount of stressors in a student's life, therefore impacting their behaviors at school. So despite all this, I think the main takeaway I got from this project is that our current system of discipline for schools is ineffective and is actually damaging our students' futures. Restorative justice practices offer an alternative method that is, I believe, safer for students in the long run. As cheesy as it sounds, children are our future, so I think that we need to make it a priority to make sure that they're being educated in a way that sets them up for success in the future. Thanks.